get started as Mr. Carrington hands out the PowerPoint, so if you would like to take notes as we're walking through things. The one thing I will say, we have 44 slides. We're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on each of the items, but as always, if you have questions afterwards, we'll answer them or later when you take things back. The other thing we'll go through this evening is we will have a couple documents, 4 or 5, that we will attach to board docs on Thursday. We just want to make sure there were no changes based on this evening. So they will be also very detailed documents. We'll attach those to board docs, and we'll also email them out to you. So whichever way you prefer, you'll be able to access those documents. And one of those would be the detailed budget booklet. Kind of walk through. Our objectives this evening are to summarize the budget preparation process, discuss major challenges that we're dealing with as a school district, have a consensus for proposed budget to be approved on April 14th, and we'll talk about the importance of that. And you guys, I know we have our backs. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure. We did have it different, but just let me know if you can't hear.
Okay, thank you.
So the process that we went through, as we do each year, starting in October, we charged our administrative team with bringing forth the needs of their buildings or areas. It's not a wish list. It began in October, and we will expand on that further, but I will say that our administrators do a great job of not bringing a wish list, of really just bringing those higher level needs, which makes the process a lot easier to walk through. Then, as you know, we met with this board, including the new members, in November to discuss the process to date, and at that point, decision to stay within the PDE index of 4.2%, but of course, our goal is always to get that down as low as possible. So one thing we will talk about this evening is a recommended change in the budget methodology, and we'll explain why that is, and that's a good portion of the discussion this evening. We'll talk about needs and enrollment, and we'll review our proposed plan. So one thing with our budget, as we start to get our arms around the school district budget, is we are a professional service organization. So our resources, our main resources are our staff. So basically we educate the students with all of our staff, and we don't quote unquote make anything. Our staff provide services to our students. So it's important to understand that the majority of what we have in our budget, or 69%, is salaries and benefits for those staff. So as we're looking at things, that's the bulk of what we're dealing with. And why that's important is our major challenge that we're experiencing is staffing. So we took a look at trends in folks that are leaving the district and leaving all organizations. We'll talk about that a little bit. I can tell you up until the last few years, no one left school districts except in the spring for the following year. We had very few resignations, retirements, or people leaving after that time period. They stayed to the end of the year. They left in the summer before the next school year started, and that's how education rolled. Our fill rate was pretty much 100%. If someone was out on a leave and had been in the district for 10 or 15 years and they broke an ankle, or they did something where they're out 6 or 8 weeks, we had someone to fill that spot. So this is a huge change for us, and it is a huge challenge. And I know everyone's experiencing this challenge, but we'll talk about that. We looked at those that have left the organization since August 1st. We have had, for this school year that we're in now, we have had 27 resignations and 7 retirements. Already for next school year, we have 3 resignations and 10 retirements. So as of August 1st of last year to now, we have 47 different staff out of a staff of about 400, or 12%. So it is a big deal, and it does impact the budget, which is why we're having this discussion now. So this major challenge in staffing, again, as I said, we are not alone. These are just 3 articles that I pulled on the challenge in education. Teachers are leaving and few people want to join the field. Experts are sounding the alarm. So that was CNN just in February of this year. U.S. News and World Report in December of 2019, since 2010, enrollment in teacher preparation programs nationwide has declined by more than 1/3, according to analysis for the Center for American Progress, meaning approximately 340,000 fewer students are enrolled in teacher preparation programs. So again, that's going to have a huge impact on those that we can fill our positions with. And then in the Philadelphia Inquirer in 2018, so we can probably assume these numbers are worse, we used to have in Pennsylvania licensure of more than 14,000 new teachers annually. As of this article, it was fewer than 5,000. So the numbers going into education are dwindling rapidly. The other thing, and again, I'll attach this document with the other documents. We had a document from the Business Administrators Group that was being passed around by MC, which is a leading provider of labor market data, called the Democratic Drought. And what it talks about is sansdemic, which means without people. That is a made-up word, but basically what it's saying is that there aren't enough people to do all the jobs that need to be done. And again, we're no different than other organizations. The difference is you need to be licensed to be a PA educator. And so it talks about 2020 being an accelerant to the existing problem. So back in the early 90s when I took my undergrad for business, we talked about this foreign concept that there would not be enough people to do jobs. So I distinctly remember that, and I distinctly remember as a college student thinking that is impossible. We are there, so it has been researched for years, but the pandemic acted as an accelerant to move that more quickly than what it would have happened, naturally. The other thing that I thought was interesting in reading this article is that some countries are actually paying people to have children. With the idea that, I was like, oh my goodness, because you think back to when we were younger, they were paying people not to have children. Now they're paying people to have children. And even understanding that it's it's probably 20 plus years before you would have someone that is actually able to do the work that's necessary. So it is a very interesting article about the shortage of staffing. So we continue in education in the shortage, and this is the other piece I wanted to point out. So I know some of you understand like having a certificate in Pennsylvania, you have to have a teaching certificate to teach a course, and you don't just have to have a teaching certificate, you have to have a teaching certificate in the area you're teaching. So for instance, if you're an elementary school teacher, you need a K through 4, a K through 6 elementary certificate. If you teach math in high school, you need a 7 through 12 certificate in mathematics. And so that, through the years, we were able to attract those that we needed, and they were certificated in the areas we needed them. And over the past maybe 6 to 8 years, we have been experiencing more trouble in those more difficult areas where there were less people certificated. We are now experiencing it a lot more heavily. So if you look at our emergency certificates, which means we had to get an emergency permit for someone to work in a classroom that does not have a certificate to teach that course, whether it be special ed or French or other hard to fill things. We had none in 2015-16. We have 10 this year. So again, as we look at the shortage and the challenge, that is the piece to pull out, that we are struggling like other districts to get those that are certificated. We've not had this type of problem in the past. We've had minor problems. So some of the ones you're seeing back in 16-17, they would be long-term substitutes for someone that's out for a while. And then in 1920, 2021, I can kind of speak a little bit to one or two of those. We had a couple teachers that were certificated to be, say, an elementary school teacher, and they wanted to be a special education teacher, and they chose to go back to school and get that. We may have emergency certified them to do that. Now we're actually experiencing, we need to get someone in that classroom, and we can't find someone that's qualified with that particular certificate. So additionally, as we've been talking about, we're continuing to experience these shortages in other areas besides teachers. Support personnel, paraprofessionals, administrative assistants, technology, maintenance, and operations. And even though they're not our staff directly, contracted services with bus drivers and food service. And one of the things with this group, we are competing against each other between our contracted services and our in-staff folks. So we're actually trading staff back and forth occasionally. So as we look at what happened with our budget this year, you will see at the top our revenue. We are projecting that we will be about 1.59% within our projections for revenue. That's very close. Acceptable budget variances in business are generally between 5 and 10%. I think that's a little high. So we generally like to be between 2 and 3%. So 1.59% for revenue is pretty good. But if you look down at our expenses, we are going to come in under budget about 4%. While we always want to save money and we're not going to spend money in any way that we don't need to, I will say that number is because we are not able to fill positions. So it's the vacancies, and it's the situation that I explained earlier. When someone's out, we can't get someone to fill it in. Before, we would put money in the budget because we needed to make sure if we got a qualified teacher and they were a more experienced teacher, we could afford that. Well, we're not even able to get that. So that's one of the reasons why we have this surplus. So I would argue it's not necessarily a good thing to have that type of surplus. It's not that we over budgeted, it's that we aren't able to fill the position. So we'll talk about change in methodology with that and why that is. The other thing I want to point out in this chart is purchase services. So if you remember back to last year, we talked about bringing back some more special education programs for students with higher needs. We were able to successfully do that. We left some money in the budget in case some of those children needed to go back out into placement, like they weren't able to stay in the classrooms here. We've been successful with that, so that's why that number is down. And Trevor will talk a little bit later about our successes in the areas of special education. So we've had some pretty good successes there. So we're going to walk through the development of the expenditure budget now. So in the past, our methodology for staff, remember that's about 69% of our budget, so a large piece of it, was we would budget the existing folks that are here now and that they would be here next year. And as I said, we usually had a pretty good idea on that. We did not remove retirements and resignations because that money would be used for a couple things. That money would be used for leaves, as I talked about, or it would be used for hiring the same experienced teacher because that's what we needed in order to fill the position. So basically that's changed, as we know. What we did was we took a look at that methodology, we changed it to the new methodology we use for this budget. We replaced resignations and retirements in the budget with the value of a new staff member, with the idea over the last 2 years of not being able to replace every single one and not being able to fill during these leaves. We also have in the budget to hire long-term substitutes. And let me explain what this is. We did some brainstorming, Bob, Sandy, and I, on, okay, we're struggling to get, if a teacher's out for a semester, we're struggling to get that person in there. What are some things we can do? And we know we're struggling with substitutes. So as we get into hiring season, and we've already started to hire, I'll talk about that, we are recommending that we hire additional folks that can be used as substitutes, or as we get those August resignations, we can fill them into those spots. So for instance, some areas that we know that will work is elementary. We know that if we hire an extra elementary teacher, we'll either have a place to put them because someone left, and hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully we already know we have 7 leaves in the fall of people that are out, either they're having a child or this or that. So that was our thought with that. And then at the secondary level, again, having that capacity either to slide a teacher into a spot that we feel is going to be vacant soon, or that substitute coverage for long-term leaves. So just trying to get a little more capacity as we find very highly skilled candidates that want to come to Southern, being able to offer them a contract to do that. So that's the one thought that we had to try to help with this. The other thought, the other thing that we've done is as soon as we got those really hard to fill openings for next year, we advertised them. We have actually advertised all our positions at this point, and I know about a couple weeks ago, we've already started to do first round interviews and started to hire really early to try to scoop up those really great candidates for the district. So we moved everything back 2 to 3 months this year. So we also look, as we're preparing the budget, at enrollment and staffing. So we compared the last, couple points in time over the last couple years, where we are total staff and total enrollment to classroom teachers. And I'll explain why we did that. We know our enrollment's going down, and it is across the board. There are less people. I mean, that's just as we talked about with the Sansdemic. But we wanted to look at, how are we doing as far as staff to student ratios? And the one thing when we first started looking at it that we have to recognize is as we started maybe 5 years ago to bring back special ed programs, and those that are on the board will remember, we came and said, okay, we got to do something about special ed. We're going to talk about that later. Let's try bringing these programs back and seeing if we can do them in district instead of having the children go out of district. Well, when you bring those programs back, the number of staff that you need for those programs are a lot higher than a typical classroom. So what we're looking at is enrollment to classroom teachers. So that's really kind of the gauge that we're using, because just taking total staff, again, not that it's too low or anything like that, but just taking total staff puts a different picture because the programs that we're offering are different than they were in other years. I also put in green the 14-15 school year because that was one of the years that we came off of the Great Recession and we were really down staff. We were really struggling at that point. So I included it, but I also wanted to highlight it as an area where we were really struggling. So this chart from Forecast 5, it compares staffing compared to our peers, and as you see, we're right on the average bubble. This one shows about 17.17 versus the previous slide showed about 17.7. The reason this is all teachers in this slide, and this comes right out of Forecast 5 versus just classroom teachers. So I'm going to turn it over to Trevor, and start on special ed.
Great, thank you, Sue. So it was not our intent when we were putting this together, but I think the next few slides will all be charts. So you get a break on some of the wordier slides and numbered slides. So as Sue had mentioned before, this is a chart that shows our total special education costs, and then the line that goes up are our placements. So that would be intermediate unit placements, and then any tuition payment for special education students that we're making just outside of the district. So you can see we are climbing up. As something Sue just mentioned, in 2016-17, we had a really sharp increase, not only in total special education costs, but in placement costs as well. So the board and administration made the decision to bring back classrooms. You can see in 17-18, it dipped a little bit. And then where the savings were and where it was really shown is in 18-19, and then it is leveling up. So there is a trend and it's increasing. The blue line, the blue dotted line is just a trend line from 2011 all the way to this year projections. So we fortunately are a little bit under that trend line. And then the red line that is kind of going a little wavy, we are pretty much right at the trend line. So this is just a result of us bringing classrooms back, and then it's also helpful just to see, like, yeah, the costs are rising, but we're doing a very good job managing that peak, because in 2016-17, that could have changed, and it could have just continued, but those decisions were made to bring that classroom back. So, as I promised, more charts. Our next chart is our health insurance. So this is just another chart about our health insurance plan. So Just as a reminder, the district is self-insured. We do that through Lincoln Benefit Trust, which is what you see up there with the LBT fund balance. We have not had a health insurance increase for a number of years. Sue has joked it was my honeymoon period, and then that's ended abruptly. So for 2022-23, we have an increase of 3.5%. We were very fortunate in that we had those 6 years with no increases. So we do have a healthy fund balance at the Lincoln Benefit Trust, which allows us to smooth in health insurance increases. Again, we had favorable claims for a number of years, so that is a benefit to being self-insured. We got to keep the money versus, say, your car insurance. If you have a bad year, you are paying more and you continue paying more, and they don't care. If you have great years after that, you always pay more. And then similar to, honestly, a lot of districts in the Lincoln Benefit Trust, but just insurance throughout the state and just the industry, cost went up in 2020-21, and at least the first half of this year, they haven't been as high as they were last year, but claims costs were going up. People deferred care a little bit with shutdowns. Now when they're returning, costs have increased from that, but also they may have ignored some of their conditions. So hopefully in the future, this does level out and it's not a sharp increase. So really our goal with this chart is just to get those two blue lines as close together as possible and do it over a slow, long period of time. Next, again, another chart for you is an example of some fluctuations we experience in the budget. This is our snow removal chart for as long as we've kept data on snow removal. If you can't tell, it's crazy, up, down, up, down, up, down. And we're just really at the mercy of Mother Nature. We can't predict the weather. We can do what we think is right. This year has been pretty mild in terms of snow, and we are already at 40,000. Given what we had this weekend, that number probably will go up, but this is just an example of some of the very wild fluctuations with expenditures that we'll have in the budget each year. This is a summary of charter school enrollment. As Sue mentioned and presented on the enrollment and staffing, and our enrollment has changed. So in 2012, 2013, we had 3148 total enrollment in our buildings, and total throughout the district was 3,254 students. On average, though, for about that 10-year period, the average enrollment is 3,016 kids. And then if you look at 2012-13, our charter school enrollment was 60 students. And then on October 1st of 21-22, it was 60 students. So while it may seem like it jumped up a little bit, it really isn't something that we haven't seen before. And then you can see after that, it did come down. So again, we can't predict the future, but the trends show we aren't really all that out of line. Then York County School of Technology, that has increased over time, and a lot of that might be related to some program offerings that they have at YCST that attract some students just based on their preferences. So this is charter schools, and I'm going to take 1 minute to kind of go a little bit into, I think, what was mentioned at one of our previous board meetings with charter schools. And I think Jim brought this up. So just some information for the board to know, and anybody watching the presentation. So funding of charter schools in Pennsylvania is done by the school districts. There's no subsidy that is provided by PDE or the Department of Education to the school districts for that charter school. So we're required to complete the PDE 363 each year, which really takes our budget and our ADM, so our student enrollment, and it calculates a tuition rate. So for this year, 2021-22, for every regular education student we have attending a charter school, we will pay $13,653. And any student that is deemed to be a special education student, we will pay $30,000, just the round number. That calculation is a one-size-fits-all arbitrary calculation that was done many years ago, and it's just the way it calculates. The biggest item I think is worth noting is that middle sentence we have. So different districts, so every district in York County and every district throughout the state will pay a different tuition rate to the same charter school for the same education to be provided to all students attending. So it does not matter where you live in this state. All of those students could go to the exact same charter school, and every school probably will pay a different rate. So it's not really based on the education they are receiving. It is just based on that school district's calculation. The level of oversight as regular public school districts is not the same for charter schools. That's something that's brought up a lot in news and the media. So the reason we talk about this, the governor does have a proposal in his budget. It is to have a flat tuition rate of $9,800 for regular education students for those that attend the cyber charter schools. And then it is a little complicated, but there is a special education rate, and it really depends on the level of student need. And it's based on Act 16, which is a special education reporting thing that we do. But those are just some big things that I do think is helpful in understanding the way charter schools in Pennsylvania work. And it is one of the bigger items in our budget, just that, because we have students that attend, and it's not really something we can really control that much. So the next item to talk about is our long-term financial plan. So this has been something that we have had in the budget for the last several years, and it's been something that we have reminded the board the steps we are taking to prepare for our building project. We had the feasibility study, which was several years ago. Mrs. Green and I have been working with the district's financial advisors, which is PFM. And one of the concepts we came up with many years ago was to put millage in place for our future debt service needs and building project needs. So at this point, the millage for the high school building project is all in place. Our estimated total millage need for all projects is 2.47 mils. Last time we presented, this was 2.49. And currently, so the year we're sitting in, we have 0.5 mils in place. Our millage is done through a roll-in process, so each year we will add a certain amount as that we will work through with PFM. We'll get updated schedules to understand how much we need each year. So through 2030-31, we will approximately need 0.22 mils each year. When we were putting out this presentation, I panicked because I saw that was highlighted. It's highlighted for a reason. Yesterday, that number was 0.29. So we actually received favorable news based on decisions that we worked through with PFM to reduce that number. So Sue will talk more about our bonds in the future and that, but it's just important for us to share that we constantly do look at the expenditures in ways that we can make changes like this for the budget. So the last two items, interest rates continue to be very low. Sue will talk about that. And then through this plan, we will have additional cash that we are able to use to reduce our future borrowings and reduce future millage needs.
Yeah, and I think the one thing to point out about the 0.22 mils, basically what we did was we took a look at the timeline for all of the projects, with the high school being moved back a year due to the pandemic, and when the high school is now scheduled to be completed, we were able to smooth it out another year, because we won't, in getting to the projects and not overlapping them too much, at 18-month projects for the rest of the projects, we were able to smooth out one more year. But I want to point out that it did not increase the millage in any way to smooth that out. It actually went down a little bit. And the second piece is that overall, and when you look at the whole plan and the interest rates, it would put us down $1 million in interest overall. So we looked at, not just smoothing it out, but also overall what the cost was, and making sure that it did go down at the end of the day. Because I always worry, like, okay, yeah, we're down 0.22, but what does it cost us overall? But it is less at the end of the day, so it is favorable.
So the next few slides, we'll talk about some budget requests and the budget request process. So I'll start off with one-time purchasing. This is something that we will do frequently with every budget year. When administrators bring their budget requests, we do ask for any one-time purchasing requests as well. These are really the three main requests that we received. One is the replacement of a sound system in the high school gymnasium. That would be something that would remain through all the building projects. So that was just to replace and have a very functioning sound system there. The next two are requests that have a little more information about. So there's marching band musical instruments, a request for $39,600 to replace a number of very needed instruments, and then weight room equipment, that was $10,500. So those two items, 2 and 3, I've been working with the high school administrators and their staff, so those that really know the most needed items in their departments, to come up with a matrix of how they will take these funds, and then I'll touch on it later, additional funds in the budget, to replace needed instruments or equipment over the next 10 years. So it's not just a one-time injection of funds to make it work. It's actually putting that plan in place for how we, 10 years from now, can continue having the best equipment and things for our students, and do it in a mindful way to our taxpayers.
So let me just also comment on number 2 and number 3. Both of these items were budgeted items years ago, prior to the recession. We did have an allocation for both of these. It was one of the things that was cut through the years as we were cutting everything to make things balance. So this would really be to put money back in to start that again and have that replacement cycle in place.
Just a quick question about that. And I'm not a band parent, so I may not know, but I do have a child that plays saxophone, and throughout, the parents needed to pay for the child's own instrument. So I understand through marching band that could look a little bit different as far as their needs, but do they not require the students to buy as a whole their own instrument? How does that work?
They do. There's certain instruments that are very, very expensive, so it'd be those types of instruments, plus there will be children that would not be able to participate if they didn't have an instrument. So it's the combination of both of those things. Plus with the marching band, maybe Bob can help me as a high school principal at one time, there are also instruments that are for marching, like you may have your normal instrument that you play, but there's a
Sure.
certain one for marching. So I think it's those types of pieces.
I think you did very well.
Okay, just that is my backup.
Very well. Yeah, I mean, I think they did a complete kind of study of the band instruments, which we've really just fixed and fixed and fixed, and they're at the
Wow.
point where we're not going to be able to fix for much longer. And we did that out of necessity, but probably overall, I want to speculate, you might be in the $400,000 or $500,000 range of equipment that's involved in that programming. And a lot of it is big tuba, bass equipment that, one piece of equipment can run over $10,000. So that's where you get into a lot of loaner stuff. And
Okay. And does this also include what they need when they're doing their presentations, on the field? When they're rolling out other things that are not instrumental?
Oh, they have a budget. They actually have a band budget for that as part of the high school budget.
Okay.
This would really be the musical instrument piece
Okay, gotcha.
of that.
Okay.
Good question, though.
So the next item we'll talk about are just recommended positions to be added in the budget. So first off, and Bob, as this might be more in line with if you want to add any commentary. So the first would be a counselor for a therapeutic emotional support classroom at Shrewsbury. And really the gist of this is to be able to provide the additional support to meet the needs of our students that are there.
And
So
that's to keep
I'll
the,
jump in real quick. We have 2 emotional support classrooms at Shrewsbury. They house all elementary emotional support for the district. This would be a shared counselor between those 2 classrooms. It really is a structure that we're already incorporating at the high school level, where we have an emotional support classroom that has a counselor in there full-time. That would leave us with the middle school would be the one location where we don't have a counselor in the room with the students. But we have ideas there for that with anyway, we have ideas that we're going to support that until we get to the level where we can also do a counselor in that program as well.
The next item is a technician for assistance with the increased hardware throughout the district. So really that would be an additional technician for our technology department. One item to note is that in the last 10 years, the devices managed by our technology department has gone from about 1,400 to over 5,000. All of you right now have a Chromebook in front of you. So that is just one of those small items that our technology department, currently of 6 people, is required to manage and maintain. So this would be very needed and welcomed assistance, not just for that group, but also for all of our buildings and all of our students. The next is support for the maintenance department. Right now, our maintenance department does not have any dedicated supporting positions. So that would be, for me as in the business manager, a person is entering purchase orders for maintenance and operations that is not their secretary or clerical support. A lot of those jobs are kind of shared amongst business office personnel. The accounts receivable bookkeeper provides a few hours every day of support to maintenance and operations. What this would be doing is actually providing them that full-time resource. And that's very helpful because the managing multiple tasks throughout the day, while is achievable, it gets to be a lot, and we have a lot of people helping out that department.
Yeah, and let me just expand a little bit on that. So I'm going to give a couple more examples. So we have one person in communications, one supporting person, and then, as we know, Mark Rill does transportation and communications. Well, the person that does communications as their full job. They also cover switchboard, our backup for transportation, and a couple other things. So we really are putting Band-Aids across the board. This will help us be able to not have people do all those different tasks, which are very, very difficult to juggle. And we're finding as we are more shorthanded, we need more assistance in those areas to be able to get everything done. Especially in the area of operations where we do turn over our staff, our custodial, our maintenance staff. It is very difficult for those folks having to interview. I mean, I think they interview weekly in order to keep positions filled. So it really is needed to kind of help. And then by helping them, it is going to help all the other areas, because right now a lot of Trevor's folks are sharing that responsibility in pieces. So they'll do a couple hours here, a couple hours there, and so it's kind of pulling staff from everywhere to accomplish that.
The next item is support in a clerical type manner for athletics. That would be a part-time position. Many years ago when I was a student, I believe there was clerical support for the athletics department. Right now it's our athletic director doing all of that on his own.
Well, and sharing it amongst some other support staff in the building. But again, I think very similar to what Sue described with the business office. We did have that position initially. The amount that is now required for eligibility for all student athletes, the number of athletes that we have participating, the number of coaches that are here for a year or two and then moving on, similar to our other positions, is really putting a huge weight of clerical work on not only Mr. Keeney, but those that are helping him from front office and transportation, et cetera, as well. So it's become, the job has become bigger while the help has become less and less over the years, for sure. I'll take the next one.
Absolutely.
So the next one, social service coordinator, is what we described to you in ESER's, or suggested use of ESER's funds. And it also addresses what I brought up for middle school, yes, because really what we're looking for with that position would be someone who's also a licensed counselor who could help support at the middle school yes room, in addition to being secondary social services coordinator. So we're working with Jill Platts, our current social services coordinator, to work out what that is going to look like as a split position moving forward.
And lastly, on the positions added, the last one's not really a position, it's additional hours and really days for our guidance counselors at the middle school level and secondary level. Really, just from the standpoint, there are a lot more requests and needs for them over the summertime, so this would just be increasing their time to, in addition to their time in the teacher's contract.
And again, both of these were areas that were cut previously as one of the cuts we made years ago in order to balance things. So these will be restorations on the increased school counselor hours.
So I have a question about this. I know in the ESSER funds, we had a couple positions, right? Didn't we have like 3 positions that were going to be funded by that in this last go-round approximately? So I'm just asking, so this one is in here, it shows federal funds, but then there's a money, so is that because it wouldn't be fully funded by the federal funds? Is that why?
No, well, it's because we have not hired that position yet.
Okay.
And it's not in the existing budget. The other 3 positions, if you were in for 21,
Okay.
22. This one is not in yet.
Okay.
So even though we presented the ESSER plan and it was approved by you, we still have to come back and say, we're going to put it in the budget and have you approve that it goes in the budget.
Okay.
So that's what the difference is, but good question.
Thank you.
So next up are items added to the budget, not people items, just other allocation type things. So one item that was important for us to make sure was part of the budget are allocation increases to building and department level budgets. Over the past year, we've really put together an updated building budget methodology, and that's utilizing a baseline, so just a number based on the type of building, and then an enrollment factor. That way we hope to avoid getting in the circumstance of the building enrollment's changing, but their budget is not keeping up. So one of the critical things in this budget was adding allocation increases to department level budgets. And really, the goal of that is to avoid where we were, and the board might remember many presentations when we would show what building allocations were back in 9-10 and how far below that we are. And that's because the cost of goods and services has been increasing. We could talk a lot about inflation, but we're not going to. And then just the instability in the being able to get products. So one brief example, in the fall, we're part of the Lincoln Intermediate Unit Joint Purchasing Board. And this is the first time anybody can remember we received no responses for paper. So we have paper, a lot of paper in the district. We're a school. Nobody wanted to to respond to the bid for paper because they could not hold pricing. We are okay. We have paper. We had enough, and we'll be fine. Similarly, we have envelopes. That's a big thing for me in the business office, and our printer, who is a great company, they've worked with us well over the last several years. They couldn't hold pricing for more than 3 to 6 months, just because they have trouble getting the materials they need. So with that, costs may increase. So we want to make sure our buildings and departments have the funds necessary to purchase what our students need. The next one is just funding to offer an EMT certification course for at the high school level. So a couple years ago, the board approved a Hack Academy program. And this is something similar. So students at the high school level would be able to be EMT certified. The last two, I'm not going to go in too terribly much because we did spend a little bit of time talking about them before. This would be the actual allocation implementation of a musical instrument replacement budget and a weight room equipment replacement budget. So same concept we talked about with the one-time purchasing. This would actually just be putting it in there so they could continue every year to replace those items. And again, I mentioned the replacement matrices were created. So they have an idea of what they need to replace and when. It's not just, oh, there's money, let's by 1-2, but we know exactly the most needed items. We've spent a lot of time over the last 6-8 months talking about the impact of federal funding, so we're going to try to spare you from really rehashing everything. In 2022-23, our federal funding is $1.9 million. Pre-pandemic, that was under $400,000. So the landscape of that has changed a little bit. It's increased a lot, actually. So just a reminder, this is limited time funding. We have until September 30th, 2024 to spend it. We do have that plan. We've worked with the ESER committee and we've brought that back to our education committee meeting. And then we did submit our plan with all of our ESER grants for how we're planning on spending that. Should things change along the lines, we will make sure to bring it back with our committee and then update the board with any changes in our plan. It's important noting there's really two types of expenditures with our federal funds. Our one-time, so this is one-time funding. We need to make sure that we use it accordingly. Then we do have our reoccurring funding. So that is our phasing out plan for staffing, which we'll touch on in a second. And then this ESER funds does come with a maintenance of state and local funding. And really, you must maintain it. So there's a calculation we had to complete to qualify for the maintenance of equity. We did that, but it is just something we need to kind of keep noting into the future. This is our the use of federal funding for our staffing and how we are planning on phasing it into the budget. So the year we are sitting in, 2021-22, we have 3 full-time professional staff and 1 full-time support staff funded by our ESER 2 grant. Our psychologist is funded by our safety grant. Just a reminder, we were awarded that safety grant on, I think, March 1st of 2020. So we got it right in time, and they just very timely when we got that. So 22-23 is the next year. So this budget that we are presenting tonight is when we're truly beginning that phase-in plan. Those 3 positions will be funded partially by the ESER grant and 25% through the general fund. That last one is what we just presented. So as Samantha asked, the social services coordinator, 100% funded by ESER 3. And then 23-24, 50-50 general fund, ESER 3, the exception of 75% for the social services coordinator. And really what that is getting us to is that final year, 24-25, when we are slowly easing all of this back in, so it is not a one-time shock to the general fund budget.
Did you get any information on the new budget that was signed, federal, with the increased school funding? I don't know if they gave you any numbers or anything.
That normally takes a while to find out. I know nothing was added for ESER funding. The big part where we would get additional funding would be through the Title I program. Is that prior to ESER was our biggest federal revenue, and we're pretty small in terms of Title I funding. I don't know much besides that, but.
Yeah, and the other piece we'll talk about with the federal budget is there was no extension of the food service piece, so we'll talk about the effect of that.
So I promise I'm almost done for this part, and then we'll turn it back over to Sue. What this is just showing our expenditure change from when we presented to everybody here in November. So the November proposed, really the first draft, or the draft that we presented to all of you in November. Budgeted expenditures were $62,893,686. Today, where they are, is $63,106,701. So we made revisions to that budget, and then we added in our federal expenditures. So that is removed because it really is just matched by the federal revenue. A lot of that would be that one-time stuff. So to summarize some of the big changes, really Sue got to have all the fun because she talked about staffing. That's going to be the majority of what was changed in our budget since November. We did reduce contingency to $300,000, so that was a $100,000 savings to the budget. We received some favorable news from PIERS. So the projected rate is not what the actual rate was, so that yielded a $160,000 favorable impact to our budget. We had the new methodology for staffing that saved a big number of about $436,000. One item that we just reduced, so we lease our phones here at the district, so the phone you see over there, we are in our last year of that lease, so we were able to remove that from the budget and keep in what we would need for maintenance costs for our phone plan. And then the one that we did touch on earlier, we changed our debt service transfer item, and that saved about $115,000. So overall, a reduction in expenditures from the November budget was $848,850. I'll turn it back over to Sue.
Okay, so,
A quick
Sure.
question about PIERS. All the talk in the news about PIERS divesting themselves of Russian investments, apparently that didn't amount to much in terms of how it affected PIERS. I mean, our contribution did not have to go up because of that.
So the PIERS rate, we get that in December of each year. We'll see. They certify it in December. They too, I think, are on a 6/30 year end.
they are, yeah.
So we won't know what next year's rate is until December 2022. So we have about
So
8-9
by
months
next
to
year,
go.
you mean 2022, 2023?
23, 24.
Okay, but
So
we know
they
what-
certified 22, 23s in December,
Okay.
yes. And the only thing we may see, Bruce, is they may change their projections based upon that, but they don't actually certify the rate each year until December, based upon the previous year end. So hopefully we'll see at least a projection change. Okay, so this slide, just, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this slide just basically does a high-level analysis of where things changed in the budget for 22, 23. So we talked about the new staff and new items. You know, even though the PIERS rate went down and it wasn't as bad as we thought, it was still $393,000. So let me just do my little commercial on PIERS again to remind people. Remember, the PIERS rate, even though it's not like when your electric goes up 5%, the rate is actually the rate on each payroll dollar. And so as that rate climbs to the mid-30s percent, that's, if it's 35%, it's 35 cents on every payroll dollar. And so that's why it is a big deal, $393,000 for that. And again, we don't have a choice as a school district to be part of that, and our employees do not have a choice. Occasionally you'll hear people say, well, I'm not gonna be part of the state's plan, or you're not legally allowed to. You must, if you're either a state employee or you're a school district employee, you must be part of the plan. There is no option not to be, and they have to pay their contribution. Health insurance, we talked about that 3.5% increase, $100,000. Debt service, again, that's the piece we had to put in versus the 0.22. Charter schools and placements. The reading program, again, that's funded by federal funding, but it is part of the increase. Then transportation, that is our negotiated amount per contract with First Student. And then just all other items, but it just tell you that there's a handful of things that make up the majority of the changes to the budget.
Okay, that number is increased from 2021, 2022?
Yes. Yes, thank you. Yep, this is the total.
Not since the November presentation?
No, good question, from 21, 22, analysis of the expenditures. So now we'll look at revenues. So our revenue budget is made up of local, state, and federal revenue. 66% of our revenues are local revenues. Of that 66%, 53% are real estate taxes. So the bulk of our revenues, over 50%, are real estate tax revenues. And even though we got that federal funding, that larger amount, it's still only 3%. Usually sits around 1%. It's 3%, but still not a huge amount of funding for the district. So local revenue, that remaining 13% is made up of things like earned income tax, transfer taxes, and interest earnings. What I want to spend our time this evening on in detail is looking at our state revenues. So it's 31% of our revenues, 44% of that is basic education funding, 11% is special education funding, 30% is the retirement and Social Security. So you'll hear us say PIERS, that is retirement. So if I use things that you don't understand, please just fuss at me and I'll explain it. And then the thing about the PIERS or the retirement and the Social Security, we have to spend that money to get this money. So it's not like we can take this money and spend it on something else. So it's 50% of the associated expenditure for that item. And then there's 15% all other, including property tax reduction. So the bulk of it is basic ed and special ed. So our basic education funding 5-year average increase is 1.23% or $114,000 a year. So not a whole lot. Special education funding 5-year average increase 2.28% or $52,000 per year. Again, add those two numbers together. Not a whole lot of increase. We did, in this budget, put in an increase to basic ed and special ed of that amount with the governor's proposal that he is going to put more money into education. We didn't want to put a lot in, but we used the 5-year average. I think it's reasonable. Again, not a ton of money, but that was the basis for what we put in for state funding. But what I want to talk about a little bit here is that it is untrue. Some people think there's this myth out there that we get money based on how many students we have. That is very untrue. There is not funding per student in Pennsylvania. It is not the charter school model. So we talked earlier about if a child goes to a charter school, we have to send that money to that charter school and they get that amount of money. That is not how it works for us. Doesn't matter how many students we have, for the most part. A small portion is how many students we have, and I'll talk about that. I can't go through the whole basic ed funding formula this evening. It would take probably an hour just to do that. I did put together a document that goes back to history and kind of explains where we were and how we got to the funding formula and kind of what things mean. But what I want to focus a little bit on this evening is that in this new basic education funding formula, there is something called the Local Effort Capacity Index. So they shorten it LECI. And it is basically the capacity to tax your residents. So if you have a lower tax rate, the formula shows that you have more capacity to tax, which means you need less state funding. If you have a higher tax rate, you have less capacity to tax, which means you need more state funding. So I do think it is important for us to understand. I'm not saying we want to tax more. I'm not saying that, but I do want to make sure people understand that the way the formula is based, this is a ratio. So if you are above a 1, it's showing you need more federal funding. If you're a 1 or below, it's less. And there is, in the document I put together, it does show an example of if this district has 3,000 students and we have 3,000 students, here's what their local effort capacity index in, and here's what it means. And I do think that is an important point, because the one thing I do become a little concerned with is if we continue, and I want to say it carefully because I don't want to ever tax more than we need to, but I do want to show that there is a penalty piece of this funding formula. So as Mr. Holly pointed out last time about charter schools, we also need to continue to make sure people understand that that's part of this formula on how we get state funding, and one of the reasons why we're getting an average of $114,000 per year. So it's kind of chicken before egg, egg before chicken, but it does make you wonder or think about the impact that capacity index has. So again, take a look at that document when we send it out, and if you have questions, please let me know, but I wanted to point that out because it's problematic. So our budget prior to the tax increase is shown on the screen, and basically we use about $1.5 million in fund balance each year against revenue to balance. And let me explain a little bit about what that is. So there's no way we're going to hit the revenue budget. As I told you before, we like to be within 2 to 3%. We're not going to hit it exactly, but I don't, being conservative, we don't want to go under our revenues. We don't want to over budget our revenues. And so that's why use of fund balance, I think, is prudent. We cannot go over our expenditures. Legally in Pennsylvania, you're not legally allowed to go over your expenditures. So again, if you take 1 to 1.5% or 1 to 1.25% of both revenues and expenses going the opposite direction, because you don't want to go over or under on either, you get about $1.5 million. It's not exact, it's just that's the basis behind it. You compare revenues and fund balance to expenditures, we have a deficit of about $448,000 at this point. As we explained, our real estate taxes are about 53% of our revenues. We look at our assessment. So there's 2 pieces in real estate taxes. The first is your assessment. Remember, your assessment stays static unless you put on a deck or an addition or what have you. It doesn't change with market value. So how does assessment go up? Assessment goes up when we have additional properties and improvements made to properties in our district. So our budget assessment is up about 1%, which yields about $342,000 before a tax increase. Our actual assessment on July 1st, we increased it by 0.75%. So the difference between those two is what we were already up above budget. So our assessment on July 1st was about 0.24% higher than what we put in our budget last year. So you take the 0.75, the 0.24, and add them together, and that gets you your 1%. And so one of the things that makes this a little tricky this year is normally by this point in time between November and now, we would have gotten 2 to 3 more assessment updates from the county. We have not gotten any since November. So we don't have any updated assessment data. I do think, based upon experience and history, I think that the number we have in there is good. I don't think it is up 0.75%, which over historically that's a good increase. I don't think we're going to get these assessment updates and come back and say we're going to have a much higher number, but as soon as we get them, we're waiting any day now. They keep telling us.
And to clarify, it's not that we haven't had or received, we'll call them edits or additional work from the county because nothing happened. It's because we just haven't received it yet. They anticipated at the end of February we were going to get it. I gave them a week, called, and they said, we hope to get it to you by the end of March. So it's not the fact that work has not happened, it's we just don't have it yet. They don't know what's happening, but we should get it soon.
So basically, thank you, Trevor, for clarifying that. So basically, we're running a little, like, we're not getting numbers we normally would have at this point in time to say, okay, our numbers look right and this is what it normally is at this time. We're not getting some of the data that we normally do. But so as soon as we get that, we're going to take a quick look at it. I think we're on track. I would be very surprised if that number changes, but as soon as we get that, we'll use that.
We're just on the tax collection report at the very bottom. There's what the overall assessment in the district was last year and what it's increased by. Where do the numbers come to make that calculation?
They come from our edit reports, and we've gotten a couple so far this year, but we haven't.
But from what reports?
They're called edit reports from the county. They give us reports that show the change in assessment from the last time they gave us a report, so then we use that to see how much our assessment's going up.
So how does that differ from what you haven't got from the county?
We haven't gotten any since November.
Okay. I thought those reports were showing increases since then, but maybe not.
Not since the November report.
Okay.
And that's what we bill on for interim. So we also aren't able to look at our interim number because we haven't been able to bill because we don't have any edits. So we're holding on that one. But yeah, so it would have been probably, and you know what it might be, Bruce, I'm trying to think through. We got one in November, which would have showed up on the January board meeting because we did November and December and January. So that might be why we're thinking.
That's why I'm thinking we were still seeing them. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
We wish we were still seeing more.
Yeah, I understand.
So again, you always take a look at our tax rate increases over the last 10 years. We've averaged about 1.75% versus the PD index of 2.75% average. And last 5 years, 1.53% versus our PDE index of about 3.163%. So just again, comparing the PDE index to, which is what we're allowed to go up. And again, we never look at the PDE index and say, this is what we want to raise taxes. We look at what we think is necessary. So we're proposing a tax increase this year of 1.36% or 0.27 mils. So it'd take us from 19.91 to 20.18, and it would generate that 448,000. It would still have us be the lowest before others increase. So even if they wouldn't have an increase, we would still be closest to central at 20.33 mils. And again, we talked about the index of 4.17 would have generated another $945,000, but again, that's not how we look at it. So that would put a total change in our real estate taxes of about $788,000. Again, the impact on our taxpayers, can't say enough about how important that is. That would be the median assessed home of $181,520. It would be $49.01 additional in tax. So again, we know that's important, but that would be what the impact would be. So this chart just shows where Southern is currently, and again, the other school districts, it's going to show the 21-22 millage rate, and then in green would be the proposed, and then at the very bottom will be if we maxed at 4.17, which is the closest to 4.2 that we could get and not go over. So
This is a dumb question.
No.
You're going to make me doubt my ability at math. If you look at the proposed 1.36% increase, the index of 4.17 is about 3 times that. But the amount of additional funds it generates is nowhere 3 times the 448,000. I know I'm missing something.
well, what you might be missing is Trevor and I said, we changed a lot of these numbers last night because we got that new updated information. Which number did we mess up? That might be the number we messed up. So we'll take a look at that, Bruce, because you're right. As I do the math in my head, I'm thinking, wonder if it is the 945, or maybe that may be because we changed the millage down to the 1.36. So let us take a look at that.
Okay, but you think the 1.36 is...
The 1.36 is definitely correct.
Correct for 448?
Yes, that's definitely correct. It would be the other number, so let us take a look at that. But yeah, we were guessing which number it would be that because we changed so many.
So I have just one quick
Sure.
question. So on the PDE index on that slide above that, so it says that the PDE index was 2.75 over 10 years. And then the next bullet says that over 5 years, the PDE index was 3.16. And then on the slide under that, it says that it's 4.17. So it's just a learning for me. Like, I know when we talked about this in December and we voted not to raise, like the PDE index was like 4.2%. So I'm just trying to reconcile the different changes. Is it just because it changes like from the 10-year number to the 5-year number to the this year number?
Sure. No, I can explain that. So the 5 and 10-year numbers, I just took the indexes for 5 years and 10 years and said, okay, over that period, what was the average? So that's just me doing an average.
Okay.
Yep. No, good question. And once okay, so let me explain the 4.17. So the PD index is definitely 4.2. Mm-hmm. But what you can't do is you cannot go over 4.2. Mm-hmm. So and we do to the hundreds for mills. So we don't want, some districts go out 4 places past the decimal point to the right. Yeah, no. So we stop at 2 places. The closest we could get would be 4.17. Mm-hmm. So we don't, we trunk it off there, and that would be the closest. So we couldn't get to 4.2. 4.17 would be the closest mathematically. So good question, but that would be the piece. And we'll check that number out, Bruce, and see if we made a boo-boo there. Okay, so I think we went through this chart. Okay, fund balance use. So again, fund balance, remember, is our cash reserves on hand. And why fund balance is important, it's important for us to have cash reserves, obviously, but it is also important for our bonds. As we issue bonds, let me tell you, they are not happy if you don't have cash reserves on hand. We've kind of been through that. I mean, they're even asking us right now, like, you're putting this money aside for the building project, as you shows below that we've reserved it. And they really would like us to keep that just on hand, but we're not, and we kind of walk through that with them. But it is important to lower that rating, or to keep that rating up, so to keep the interest rates down. So the better the rating we get, the lower the interest rates we get, and that's critical for debt. So as we walk through this, we have unassigned fund balance at the end of last year, $4.5 million. We're projecting an addition of $2 million. Again, that's the sum of revenues being higher than anticipated, expenditures being lower. If we have approval for the one-time purchases, they would come out of that. We're proposing using $1.5 million in fund balance for 22-23's budget. Then the $1.8 million, that is us calculating a 5% unassigned fund balance. So that's taking anything above 5% and assigning it to the building projects. So I know that's a lot. If anybody has questions, please let me know. And that's going to put us with $11 million in money for the building projects. And again, the idea behind this cash is to phase in the building projects, and also if we don't have to issue that debt. So it really is kind of goes hand in hand with that. So we're continuing to talk with PFM, who's our financial advisors, on when we use this cash and when it makes most sense. The one thing I may recommend, and we're continuing to look at it, is for the last piece of the high school that we use this to finish off the high school without issuing additional debt, and that'll give us some time in between without debt. So, but we have to look at all the factors in that.
How'd the first bond sale go?
The first bond sale went well in November. We came in lower than they were pretty happy. And I will tell you, so give me 2 more slides and we'll talk about the bond sale. No, you're good. So that's fund balance. So then this just shows if we have the proposed tax increase, this balances our budget, revenue and expenses. So our budget next steps. At the April board meeting, we're asking for approval of the proposed budget. Please let us know between now and then if you have any questions. We can sit and we can meet with you. We can go through your questions. It is important to approve a proposed budget in April, and I want to explain why that is. And also, please note that the budget can change between April and May. It can go up, it can go down, any changes can happen between April and May. It's just important that we put a budget out in April for public inspection. So that we start the clock, because we need to have the 30 days between then. I really like to have the budget approved at the May meeting so that we can get the information to our bill printers and get it to our tax collectors, get tax bills out on July 1st. And why that's important is if we get the tax bills out on July 1st, we can start collecting, and then we can earn interest on that money before we have to spend it. So interest earnings, as interest rates hopefully rise a little bit, we can get more earnings, and again, that's less money we have to get from other sources. So it is important. I mean, at the end of the day, those tax bills are going out regardless, so let's make sure we can get them out and try to earn some interest on the money. The other thing I wanted to point out here is we are not in April setting a tax rate. You only set a tax rate once in the budget process, and that is in May. So it's really just approving the document, not the tax rate. So I just want to make sure everybody understood that. There'll be no motion for what the tax rate is. Now, obviously, the document has to have revenue in it in order for it to balance. But again, we can change things between April and May. We're not establishing a tax rate at that point.
Could you please go back?
Of course.
One, I would sure like to see the wording of that second bullet, the one that says recommending tax increase of 1.36% or 20.18 mils, changed to 0.27 mils, which is the amount of the tax increase. You could read that to say, hey, we're increasing the tax rate by 20 mils.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good idea.
No,
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, we'll change that, okay, yep. Bruce is just on fire. There's the second thing. Yep, we'll get that switched up. Okay, and now this is, so we're moving off budget a little bit, but obviously it kind of all interrelates. So we have the parameters resolution on the board agenda for Thursday night for the $40 million or less in bonds. Again, when I reiterate that the parameters resolution says 45 million, that's really simply to make sure that there's the right amount of bonds in each spot because they can't move it around. But we are not going to issue more than $40 million. It'll be 40 million or less. And it is an excellent time for us actually to go for bonds. There's a lot of things going on in the world that is having a flight to safety or a safe haven asset. And we are at near historic lows for interest rates still. What PFM is telling us is that the demand is very high compared to the supply. The last couple issues they have done very well. They're actually happy with our timing because if it's approved, then the proposed timeline would be to have the bond sale on or after March 24th and then close, and we'd have the money by the end of April. So I think it's actually working out well in our favor that we're actually going out for bonds right now. So we kind of hurried things along there and got that moving, and I think it's going to be to our favor. But I don't know if that answers your question or not, Jim.
Yeah, but I got one more. Is this the last, our last, or do we have another?
We need about 15 more million for the high school project. So what we have to look at is when we get to that point where we need the money, whether or not we want to use cash reserves or we want to do another bond issue for the high school or we want to hold. So that's really what we're going to wait and see when we get there is what we think makes most sense from the interest rate environment and what's going on in the world. So I think we'll have to just kind of play with whether or not we would probably need at least one more issue, but whether or not we do the full 15 million, we'd have to decide. And remember, we try to say, if at all possible, we have this $40 million issue, but we try to stay at 10 million or less because that gets us bank qualified, which are lower interest rates. And that's really what helped us smooth out the 0.22 because we were able to take an issue of 30 million and make it three $10 million issues and really help to smooth things out and lower costs.
I picked this up on the internet, so take it for what it's worth, but I'm trying to confirm that it's anywhere near accurate. In terms of determining a district's borrowing capacity for bonds, it looks like you average 3 years of revenue and then take 225% of that.
We do that lovely calculation every time,
Is it that simple?
Yeah.
So that would say we're like 130,000 would be our total borrowing capacity.
130 million.
130, yeah. Thank you very much.
Couple more zeros, but yes.
We're going to be under, well under 100 million even with 30 million or so outstanding bonds we have now. Is that?
I don't have that in
We
front of
have-
me. Let me take a look at it, because what I'm picturing in my mind is the whole plan with all the building projects, not like where we are, like, after we're done the high school, because you're asking when we're done the high school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get a feel for how close to that.
I don't think we're at all
not
close. We're not at all close. I mean, that I can answer, we're not at all close.
Okay.
And actually, that's a comment that, that Jamie from PFM makes each time, that Southern, they like the way we smooth things in, but also they said, your debt capacity, you're not anywhere close, so we don't have to worry about those kinds of things, and we can structure it the way it should be structured versus having to worry about the debt capacity. So we're in good shape there, but we can take a look at that.
Okay.
I'm just writing myself a note so I don't forget.
All right, so I will wrap this up. The last two things, again, these are kind of non-budget things that we need to just bring up and share. So these are the balances of our other funds, so our other funds fund balance, as of June 30th, 2021, so at the end of last year. our capital reserve fund, which are for those outside of the big capital projects. These are the smaller items. Our balance there was $683,000. Debt service fund, so that is where the millage is going right now. It's earning interest, it's sitting there, it's 1.6 million, and that's designated for the debt service roll-in. We have a retirement fund, it's $535,000, and that's for retirement stipends. And then our cafeteria fund, that is $110,000 net of PIERS and OPEB. So the non-accountant way to say that, that's some PIERS and OPEB, they are just some really required accounting entries that we have to make, but the gist is it's $110,000. Speaking of food service, in March every year, and something that is on the board agenda this month, is our food service management renewal. So this year, 2021-22, is our third year with Whitson School Nutrition. We are either required to renew that contract or go out for RFP. We are recommending a renewal for the 22-23 school year, and the guarantee from Whitson's with that is $5,000. So the way the guarantee works, should we make anything less than $5,000, Whitson's would cut us a check for $5,000. Should it be more, we get to keep all of it. That's just really their commitment at running at what they feel they can operate at. The big item that Sue did mention, and it is unfortunate, we do not yet know the status of the federal program. So since really with the exception of about 2 weeks in 2020, in August through September of 2020, meals have been free since March 16th, 2020. And it's been outstanding for our students this year. For all of our students that are there, it's been one of the first years. We've had a lot of students increase in their breakfast participation. So the stigma of eating breakfast at school that I know was around when I was a student is gone. Kids are feeling free to eat breakfast, which is awesome. It is a great value, so breakfast is only $1.25 for all grade levels, and you do get some healthy food and a great meal. So the bummer is the easiest way to say it. We don't know what the federal program is going to be. They have not renewed a free meal for all approach that has successfully worked for the past year and a half. It was not included in the most recent legislation passed by the federal government. There's some action in many groups trying to get the government to do something separate. But as of right now, we are returning to a paid, free, and reduced model, which brings us to the next point with the price increase. We are not recommending a meal price increase for any of our meals. With the exception of all of this, we did increase meals last year. We just never had to charge for them this year. So breakfast would be $1.25 for all grades. Adults will pay $1.95. Lunch is $2.50 for elementary, $2.70 for secondary, and adults will pay $4.05. And in terms of the food you get, it is a fantastic deal. So I would encourage anybody to buy a school lunch, even from the adult standpoint. So this really just concludes the presentation, and then we'll have our questions and decisions. So March 17th, we will be providing those detailed budget both via board docs. April is when we have the proposed budget, which is called PDE 2028. So it is not that really soft looking book we'll give you. It's a pretty boring state form that you can look at and read through. In April, I think it's on this board agenda, would be to renew the food service management company contract with Whitson's and then approve lunch prices. April would be the absolute latest we'd be able to do it. And then May is to approve the final budget and tax increase so we can get those bills printed, mailed, and get our tax collectors busy collecting that revenue.
Okay, so you're not planning to give us all hard copy budget books like in the past?
I think we stopped doing that about 3 or 4 years ago, but if,
That long
yeah.
ago. But anybody
Used to.
would, but
Could be 3.
anybody would want that could get it in hard copy?
Yep.
So I guess at this point, I would, unless you have anything else, I'd open up to questions.
We have questions?
John.
No, I don't have any questions at this time, but I really appreciate the specific detail in, as, you know, taxpayer in the district, I want to see all the details where our hard-earned money is going. And this is very conservative and very full of explanations of what is needed, why it's needed, the things that need to come back. We want to see our kids be successful, and this is wonderful. Thank you for all the work.
Thank you.
Thank you.